Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's Laura Kingen. It's Wednesday, about 1:15. It's about the time I start. Today, I would like to speak about visual perceptual skills and how that impacts learning. I've been referencing different sensory systems. Last, I talked about hand grasp. I've also talked about visual motor skills. But today I really want to differentiate between visual motor skills and visual perceptual skills. So before I do that, I'd like to talk about a little business. And then I'll talk about visual perception, and then I will illustrate these different concepts, less in an activity format today, but more, actually I have a bunch of handouts that I'd like to illustrate different types of visual perceptual skills. And then in anticipation of next week, I keep referencing performance components. And so I figured next week I should review performance components. So that'll be the topic for next week. And that'll wrap up September. And then October will be interesting. We'll see where we go with October. I also want to make sure that you all know that I am offering my OT range of motion clinics on Thursdays at 1 o'clock. That would be through telehealth, and it's in a group setting. Also, after these live demos on Wednesdays at 2:30, I'm offering a group sensory activity session where families can join through telehealth and in a group setting, similarly to what I've done here in these live demos, is actually present an activity for the families to participate in. So, yes, there should be some educational quality to that, but the idea is really more for active participation. It's less contextual and more active participation, so that at least one day a week at 2:30, you can join in and actually participate on your own at home. Try to recreate the activity. I'm thinking probably starting really with obstacle courses. And we'll see how this evolves. And please let me know, give me feedback on what works best for you all, what you would like to see. But I know that there are people out there, special needs individuals and families, I think, who could benefit. So I feel like I'd like to offer that to you. So, oh shoot, I didn't bring that other small mirror, but I brought a large mirror today. So this is an example of a perceptual skill, and I want to see, there we go. Because of the reverse, ta-da, there we go. So my business is Sensory Solutions, Inc. The tagline for the business is offering strategies to reach wholeness. My phone number, best number to reach me, it's a New York cell phone number, although it's been a long time since I lived in New York. But it's area code 631-848-8852. You can also PM me on Facebook. I do officially have a website now, but it's in process. I'm eventually looking at trying to transfer over these live feeds. I'll probably still do it on Facebook, but also on YouTube. But technically, if you're on the website, I just did this the other day, so it's brand new. It's sensory-solutions-inc.business.site. But it's pretty basic, and really the information, the bulk of the information that I have online about what I do is actually on Facebook, and you can look at Facebook at SSI-FB. You can also look at Sensory Laura. You can also look at SSIOTROM, and also at Slot Cars Trains. I will continue these Wednesdays at 1 o'clock. It's more like about 1:15 by the time I get online. What other kind of business things? I'm offering clinical and telehealth OT I can practice, actually evaluate and treat within the state of Arizona due to my licensure. But I can teach and consult outside the bounds of that. I am wanting to look at doing more group types of sessions, thusly that Thursday range of motion clinic and later on today. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. I think that's about it for the business stuff. So let's talk about visual perception. What I thought about today is, I've been referencing as a registered occupational therapist, I can evaluate and treat. Only a certified occupational therapy assistant only does the treatment, but as a registered therapist, I can actually evaluate. So I thought this topic is a perfect example to show you all beginning orientation towards showing you all about what the evaluation process is. And the visual perception is a great area to show you. So I'm going to use my couch. I don't think I've ever had a kitchen table. We use these TV trays, actually. So this is going to be tricky, and I apologize. I did not rehearse this. So because of the reversals. This is the developmental test of visual perception. And I'm going to try this. Let's see. There we go. There it is. The developmental test of visual perception. Now, this is the second edition. So let's see what we have in here. I'm belaboring this process because I feel like it's that important. So, in the intermission while I'm getting this to happen, it's a shameless plug for my husband's band, the Van Devere Breaks. They're on YouTube and on Facebook. I even have a groupie page. You guys are great. Really great. So that's what that is. Okay, so here's the test booklet. I'm trying to get it. Sorry, guys. Have patience with me. Although, to illustrate the point about visual perception. So this is the DTVP2. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to talk about this booklet, what's on this first page a bit, because it actually does break down some different skills. Over here, with this test booklet, you actually get several different scores. There is a general visual perceptual, how's that? A general visual perceptual score. There's a motor reduced visual perception, and then there's a visual motor integration. So the visual motor integration is more the eye-hand coordination, more like drawing, copying, doing pencil types of tasks. The motor reduced visual perception is you look at pictures and you're given a sample and then some options, and then you have to pick the option by looking. There's no motor involved other than just somehow expressing what you feel like the right answer is. And then for this test booklet, there's a total score. But for purposes of standardization, I'm not going to show you this booklet and what these different items are, because then that would mess up the standardization. But on here, what I would like to talk about are these different items here. Some of them are visual motor, some of them are visual perception. But I want to point this out because it illustrates some of the different types of visual perceptual skills And why do we want visual perceptual skills? Well, for one, for academic learning. In anticipation, planning for this today and thinking about, visual perception, where does that fit? I've talked about like basic sensory systems like tactile, visual, tactile, proprioception, vestibular, very, very basic types of input. It's more input, there's no necessarily output that needs to happen. But as we grow and develop, and as our brain becomes more sophisticated, we start developing our perceptual skills. There's visual perception, but there's also like a tactile perception as well. Whether I do a whole separate demo on that, probably not. Maybe. But it's about perception and being able to perceive things. A classic example of like a tactile perception skill would be like, as a woman, like reaching into my purse and trying to find my hairbrush versus a wallet versus a penny. Being able to distinguish with just your sense of touch what something feels like. But today we're talking about visual perception. So it's what we're perceiving with our eyes, which is different than visual motor. Visual motor is more just the movement, like you've seen me track, like watching the tip of an object moving. You see how my eyes are moving? It's a whoops. That was not so smooth. But my eyes are smoothly tracking horizontally and vertically. At midline, there's smooth transition. But it's just motor. There's no real context that I'm getting from that per se, other than an automatic, let's say a ball is being thrown at me. Visually, I see it and my eyes tell my brain to move my body to receive that ball. That's the sensory integration. I am receiving something in, my brain is doing something, and there is some kind of motor output. But it's still a motor, it's a more primitive type of neurological activity. As opposed to visual perception gets into more of the higher level parts of the brain. So, according to this test, some of the different skills that I would look at, position, and these are non-motor, so this is more pure visual perception. Position in space. I will show you this one, because this is a sample. So, and I don't need the mirror for this. You can look at this. Look at these. Which one is in the same position as this one? Obviously, it's this one. Look at this. Which one is in the same position as this one? Be this. So as I've been referencing as that classic example, is you have a symbol like a B. But depending on how you change it and shift it, it could be a B, a P, a Q, or a D. And so it's for us to be able to perceive the difference and make meaning from that symbol. A lot of the individuals I work with still, they reverse writing to the point where rarely, I think I've had maybe 2 people I've worked with, but I have seen this, where they naturally will write, instead of left to right, they'll write right to left and they'll write backwards. So something is going on perceptually in their brain that is less functional academically for the way that we function in our society today. So that's position in space. And this is a standardized test. This particular test goes from 4 to 12 years. Standardized for that age. It's important so that we can actually get age level scores and standard scores for this. Comparing it to other kids of that age group, how is somebody functioning? And like say academically in the schools, we do these kinds of tests so that we can help somebody function better academically if they're struggling. So let's say they're having problems. I just worked with somebody the other day who's having some reading comprehension problems. I'm curious about his visual perceptual skills. He was reversal writing. There's a couple of flags. So that's a perfect example. If he's struggling academically, maybe there's some perceptual issues that could be contributing to some academic difficulties. That's where an OT evaluation in the schools would come in. Some other examples of some visual perceptual skills according to this test: figure ground skills, visual closure, and visual form constancy. Now, I do have another visual perceptual test. The test of visual perceptual skills. And this goes up to age 19. So I don't know what else I want to say about standardized testing. That's part of the evaluation process to determine, what your most appropriate tools are to use based on your referral and the issues that the individual is having. Okay. And then this is the response booklet, by the way, for the motor portion of this particular, the DTVP2. But that's essentially it, I think, on what I wanted to share with you. I guess on this test booklet, with the standardized scores. This is such a perceptual task for me here. There we go. So this obviously is average. And then if scores are falling below in this gray area, that individual is having some issues with visual perception. And OT is a perfect discipline to work with individuals. And if there's issues with perception, there's probably issues elsewhere. One of the ways I like to address visual perception is through motor skills. Again, obstacle courses. It's why I love obstacle courses so much. When I talk about performance components, there's so many different things that you can address with obstacle courses. But as an OT, I know a lot of OTs do worksheets. Fortunately now with the iPad, there's lots of apps that address perceptual skills. Even games are working on visual perceptual skills. And while I think it's important to limit screen time, there are so many things you can do with an iPad, where in the past, like us OTs, we'd be carrying around bags of equipment and all kinds of stuff. And then now you just take an iPad and there's so much that you can do. But it's also very limited and it's 2D. And, sitting and being stationary for a long time, even just playing games, even if you are working on visual perceptual skills, is one thing. But as an OT, I would like to incorporate more things and address more of those performance components as possible. So doing movement, like having somebody lie prone on a ball while they're working on, segue into my next portion here, are some of these visual perceptual skills. Like, for example, visual figure ground. I'm going to go through these handouts. This is kind of the activity portion for today. But these are handouts that I've collected over the years. And I've picked these particular ones to help illustrate some of the visual perceptual skills that I want to highlight for you all. So we'll see how I can do with this. Some of this I think will be better with the mirror so you can see it straight on. But the classic, now I'm going to date myself. I know Highlights magazine is still out, but I remember being a little tiny kid going to a pediatrician's office and seeing Highlights, and I love those magazines, those Highlights magazines. Well, and here I am now in OT, it makes sense. But I remember these in the Highlights magazines, things like hidden pictures. So for this particular one, you need to find, there's so many birds, 21 birds or something like that. So there's a bird, and there's a bird. And you look around, there's a bird. So you can have kids work on fine motor coloring and along with the visual perceptual skills, But this is visual figure ground for the same object as opposed to What if there's different types of objects? So like down here, there's some different kinds of things. So to me, it's a higher level visual discrimination. Well, it's visual figure ground and visual discrimination, being able to discriminate from one item to another. I feel like it's show and tell. Some other handouts. This is more of a visual discrimination. Which one is different? Being able to look and seeing which one is different. One of the skills is visual form constancy. And a perfect example to illustrate visual form constancy is font sizes and different types of fonts. So in the bazillion and one different choices we have for font styles, how do you know what a B looks like in one font style to a different font style? It's because you have visual discrimination skills, at least. But kids who have difficulty with that, they'll have trouble going from one font to another. And so for some of them, you may want to just stick with one basic font size. Go from there. But recognize that that can be an issue. And it is a skill. Like we should get, I feel like sometimes we should get credit for writing our name down. When we take a test, we should get credit for writing our name down, you know? I mean, it's the same kind of a thing. You get credit for having visual discrimination skills. And you can imagine, like, this is very young, you know? Like, you know, is this like, you know, in preschool? I mean, in kindergarten, kids are learning to write their name, writing their address, writing their phone numbers. That's in kindergarten. So how much younger is this? So these are just some other examples I wanted to point out, just the handouts that I've had. Position in space. You know, learning. Let's do in first. Learning, this is why I like so much to do it practically and active motor, is to put, doing obstacle courses, for example, and having people go around and in and up and around with your body, incorporate so many different performance components as opposed to sitting at a desk and just doing a handout. It's got its applications, but as a therapist, I would like to be more thorough. But to illustrate in, here's a worksheet to show what is in versus what is out. It helps us to learn about position in space. Down. Whoops, sorry. Up. I guess what this is what you need to do. Say you have up and then you've got down. Circle the ones or recognize the ones that are going up. You know, obviously that's down, that's up. Visual discrimination. Matching. Front and back. One of the things I loved as a kid were mazes. To me, this is a great illustration of incorporating both the visual motor and the visual perception, because it is a pencil paper task. But to be able to differentiate, you know, these lines and so I think mazes are great for the visual motor, visual perceptual, dare I say, interface. I kept these together. I just want to flip through these. Obviously, there's a visual perceptual component, but there's a visual motor component as well. And so when we work with children, individuals on basic writing, you know, is to be able to copy. I mean, this is the beginning of the formation of becoming comfortable with symbols. So it's visual motor and the development of visual perception. Also note how large this is. I think we have to be very careful, certainly as a therapist. A lot of kids are unable to write really small. Start large and work your way down. This is part of the purpose for the evaluation, is that a therapist can help evaluate and determine where is the individual at. We want the just right challenge. We don't want it too hard. We don't want it too easy. We want it just right. So you have to work a little bit for it, but to also experience success. So where is that person at? Working in a classroom with a large blackboard, whiteboard, whatever it is these days, where you can write large, you're actually getting in range of motion, you're working on balance. There's a lot of performance components you can work on writing large. And unfortunately, in my opinion, having people sit at a table for prolonged periods of time is really frustrating. Like this person I just worked with the other day. He's 9 years old. From 8 to 3, he has to sit there while his parents are working, be responsible for his education. He gets 10-minute breaks every hour and a lunch break. That's a lot of time. And for kids who are developmentally immature or not quite ready, we're really setting them up for some real academic struggles. I know I really enjoyed learning, and I would hope that kids these days can embrace learning as well. So anyway, I'm belaboring that point, I guess. But in this packet, I want to point out some other things. And I have found some apps that do these kinds of activities. So no longer do we need the worksheets. And some of this is that rote practice and developing that body memory, kinesthetic memory of what it is like, what it feels like to write a line like this, so to speak. So something can be said for that repetition. Personally, I think some of it is droll, but it has its role. Because we're working on refining, and I let the individual kind of develop this on their own. So with this page, they need to replicate the top box down in the bottom box. So a lot of spatial relations. For example, here's another of learning about how things kind of fit together in the real world. See how the developmental progression is going on this? I think that's all I wanted to show you on that. You know, taking common shapes common shapes and starting to integrate them into our real world. Another one of my favorites when I was a kid, I loved dot to dots. You know, this also helps us see, this is like an interface into more cognitive skills too, because what a great way to learn how to count is by going dot to dots, and then you're creating a picture. And so there's also a form of visual closure involved with this, on being able to see this and making sense that this is going to create something eventually. Individuals who have difficulties with visual closure have trouble with this. They're having trouble at this level. They're going to have, it's going to cause difficulties at higher levels of cognitive functioning that we need, like for academics. If you're having a problem with putting whole concepts together at this level, you're going to have trouble at a higher level when you get into more of the context stuff. Some other things. Welcome to my world. I think this stuff is fun. You know, helping people to learn how to write. Again, this is to illustrate. I think we get really stuck in, you know, teachers have so many different hats they have to wear, which is one reason why OTs are there to help assist teachers. For those students that are far enough off the norm where they need extra assistance, say for their age, teachers need to focus on the bulk of the students in the class, but if there's kids who are having trouble, you know, contact an OT, we can help out. So here's an example of writing much larger versus being kind of stuck in having to write in a certain size. There's writing apps with lines. You can get different size lines. And so that's a lot of fun. Honestly, I rarely do this in my sessions. I don't sit with my clients and have them practice writing. I just don't. I integrate more movement into my sessions. and I may have somebody lie on a scooter. I may take some tape, and I'll tape a Z or whatever on the floor, and literally have the child propel themselves on the scooter board over the Z, over the letters, or doing things like that, much more integrative. So we're working on this, but in a much larger scale. Now, if I really wanted to target the fine motor, I might do this, but then I may take like a carpet square and put lotion on it and have the child like rub the letters, make the letters onto the carpet square. I mean, a lot of creative kinds of things like that we can do. Yes, maybe I will have them write this, but I think if you want, this is something that would be done, well, I want to say like as homework. I actually went to a client's house, and while I was treating their sibling, the client, because I was seeing several client family members, while I was treating one, the other was sitting there practicing this as their homework. So that was something that was derived from that individual person on their own. They did it on their own. Rather than me saying, here, do this, they did it on their own because it was motivating enough and they were inspired enough to do it. It was just right for them where they could feel success. And that to me is brilliant. That's self-regulation. That's independent functioning. For that child, at that point, they were doing the work that they needed to do. And that's great. That's when I feel like I've done my work. Some of these other concepts, let me go back to the mirror here, because this is really working on reinforcing those like visual discrimination, visual spatial relations, visual form constancy, activities like this. I actually really do like these handouts. I've used these a lot. What more do I want to say about that? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. To be able to go and take the time to be able to differentiate a D. It's not a Q. Here's a... There we go. Another example. Here's getting into some of the form constancy, where some of the letters are of a different font, bold. Another example. We can do, these are symbols. We're talking about symbols. So whether it's numbers or letters, shapes. So you can see, we can take this and see how some of, like the 10 is a 10 or an 01 or sideways. Being able to visually discriminate the difference. Another visual discrimination. You know, these are basic activities. I'm sure some of you have done some of these. Some of you may have had kids, students, whatever, do these. But being able to differentiate. With this one, I think it's the W. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You know, different colors for the different letters. And then you can draw something. Again, visual form constancy. What's the instruction on this one? Circle all the P's. Then there's something like this. There we go. You know, even doing something like a game, you know, where, say, somebody's like, got a beanbag, standing on a rocker board, and they have to throw the beanbag somewhere, and every time they get it right, they can move on to the next one, to the point where they're trying to follow the path for all the Z's. So yeah, sure, you can color all the Z's, but you can also make it fun and do some creative activities that go along with this. That incorporates more performance components, because a lot of times people who have fine motor issues, visual perceptual issues, also have gross motor issues. And in today's day and age, when we're doing a lot of couch potato-y kinds of things, getting up and moving is really important. The first one to acknowledge that. A couple more. Getting a little more sophisticated. There's a word box. And then these are the different items. And then you need to find the different items. So this is a much higher level. because now you're incorporating some vocabulary into a visual figure ground kind of a task. But there's also the, what's the right, interface is the wrong word, but that part of the brain that knows, that can read the word pig, makes meaning out of the symbols P-I-G. The brain can interpret what that actually means, gets a visual image of it, and then can look and find the pig. So for some kids, this is a really high-level academic task, and should be congratulated when they can get to that point, because it'll continue to take them on. And then we have things like word searches. So those are some handouts that are talking about visual perception. And what I thought I would do is just illustrate a couple other more functionally oriented activities. Like, for example, puzzles. This is a floor puzzle. I love floor puzzles. Can you imagine that? We can get on the floor and do the puzzle as opposed to sitting at the table. And that's fine. But if I want to address more performance components, I'm going to have somebody on the floor where they can do some weight bearing and moving around and leaning and reaching. You know, remember like when the lighting is weird, sorry. Like, I'll just illustrate. As a variety to sitting at a table and a desk, is how about doing the floor puzzle while you're lying on the ball? Right? Oh. Sorry. So if I have, for example, all these pieces spread out on the floor, I'm going to have to reach and go over here and put it over here. So there's some balance as well as other things that I'm trying to get into the activity without being too exposing. I've alluded to this, again, I love this. And if you could see the texture on that, but it really is, it's a woven checkerboard. So putting this on the floor and using these large pieces, now I'm going to test you guys. I actually do give homework, by the way. What grasp is this? Since we've gone over the grasp before. I mean, for my hand, there it is. For my hand, these are really large pieces. So it's kind of a disc grasp. It looks very similar to a cylindrical, but this is a disc grasp. So putting these discs, it incorporates fine motor, as well as knowing like where there's a perceptual quality to the checkerboard. It's a functional application of our visual perceptual skills that would be different than, say, the academics. And then one final activity I wanted to show you. Again, I do have some of my favorites. Stringing beads. I've talked about basket weaving 101 for OTs. Well, we like to string beads too. For lots of different reasons, because we can address a lot of different performance components. So there is, I know today's topic is visual perception, but I want to revert back to visual motor for a couple moments here. These 1-inch blocks, see, this is a palmar pinch as opposed to the tip pinch. But these 1-inch blocks, as opposed to really fine beads that are really small, we're working on large, going to smaller is how we evolve. So obviously we work with the 1-inch beads when people are, right about like that, as opposed to really fine, if that makes any sense. To reinforce the strength of our muscles. I think I just kind of messed that up, but anyway. We're working on fine motor skills, and the repetition is working on the endurance for the fine motor skills. We're also, we're working on bilateral motor coordination. One hand has to hold and do one thing, while the other hand does something else. It's still pretty visual motor in nature. I have to look and see where the hole is and perceive where that hole is. So there is some visual perception, but it's a lot of motor skills. There is a cognitive quality to this, and that's the sequencing. But there's also a visual discrimination quality with this. I need to visually discriminate the yellow from the purple, from the orange, from the square to the circle to the cylinder. And then I'm being asked in this task specifically to sequence yellow cube, purple ball, red cylinder. Same thing over and over again. That's more cognitive. It's sequencing, it's remembering, it's organizing. Looking down into the conglomerate of beads is a visual figure ground task. I need to be able to figure out which is the orange out of a bunch of beads. So that's visual perception. So this particular task really incorporates a lot of different kinds of performance components, which is why OTs love this so much. This particular activity comes with cards. This particular task is actually asking the individual to pick these particular blocks. They can pick the color, but they need to be able to have the visual closure skills to be able to know that this shape, what this shape would look like, what this shape would look like. Then be able to go and amongst a lot of choices is to be able to figure that out. So when how do I want to say this? So the reason I am working on this kind of an activity is because I've evaluated somebody and it's been determined that developmentally they need to still work on these skills, if that makes sense. So this particular activity is a great integrative kind of an activity. Let's take it a step further. This actually is an occupation. This is something, this is a humble bag somebody made me, or gave to me. It was their first humble bag, medicine bag. I live in an area and have some very dear friends who are Native American. I myself have done beading like this. These are really fine beads. But this is really, it's cultural and it's part of Native Americans' occupation. You can make money, trade, gift others. It's the high level end, the continuum of the functionality of why we would work with beads. That illustrates both visual motor and visual perceptual skills and why we would want to develop them. As an occupational therapist, I am here to help people to function as independently as possible. For a child, it might be learning how to string beads. Once they do this, we work down to something finer, depending on what the goals are, depending on where that person is at and what we're trying to address. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that kind of brings in a little bit of even about occupational therapy and occupation, because people are like, well, what is occupational therapy? Well, occupation, activity is to help improve independent functioning. And from the standpoint of Sensory Solutions, Inc., we are offering strategies to reach wholeness. Contact me through Facebook, PM me. My phone number, my cell number is area code 631-848-8852. Keep in mind the group activities that are now scheduled on Thursdays at 1, the range of motion clinics, and then at 2:30, the sensory activity therapy sessions. So I always like to end my sessions just with a little calming. So I thought for today, like we did last week, let's just take one deep breath and then we'll wrap it up. Taking a deep breath. Slowly let it go. And the phone just rang. Be safe, everybody. Thank you.